Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode. Today, we're just going to do the first part of a series, actually, on designing a chapter, which will be what this video is about. And the next will be about actually how to take that chapter and apply crusade rules to it and start building up a crusade with your own custom-made Space Marine chapter. In this case, it's going to be a chapter I hope to feature regularly on this channel. It'll be the Watch Knights Space Marine chapter. The Watch Knights Space Marine chapter is a custom-made, all Primaris made chapter that, again, as I said, will hopefully be featured regularly on this channel. We're actually going to do a section of Crusade games with it, showing you how this army performs in Crusade, how to apply Crusade rules to it, and leveling them up in a Crusade. As you can see, the chapter is all Primaris, and this video will be going over the creation of said chapter and the thoughts that went behind it, and how to make it narrative and fun. I started thinking about making the Watch Knights chapter, Space Marine chapter, all Primaris Marines when 8th edition came out and Primaris was released, because in part I believe Primaris is where they're going to be going with all Space Marine stuff in the future. I already had a regular chapter of regular Marines, but I went the Primaris route. And you can find a number of good White Dwarf articles on designing your own chapter. This is not going to be a complete rehash of that. If you want a really good example of one, I'd recommend issue 458, where they're kind of going over the White Dwarf chapter, the Tomb Keepers. Instead, I looked at the new Primaris stuff and I began looking at a lot of the new fluff. One of the areas I started looking at as far as lore and storyline was Spears of the Emperor. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. It'll give you a wonderful idea on just how things are in Imperium Nihilus, and it does a pretty good job of showing Space Marines on the brink. And let's face it, humanity at this point in the timeline is on the brink, and Primaris is pretty much the last gasp. It's the last chance to try to retake things and get things back. I particularly like this book simply because it showed how two different chapters operate, and it gave me some ideas on how I thought my Space Marine chapter would operate. I'm more along the lines of the Mentors Legion than I am the Spears of the Emperor, but that's just me. And like I said, this shows a great view of Imperium Nihilus and just how desperate things are on that side of the galaxy. Of greater impact on how I viewed and decided to make my Primaris Marine Army was Dark Imperium by Guy Haley. Now, I know a lot of critics have panned this book and have dismissed it, and while it's not his greatest work, it is still a pretty good book. Yes, I know they have retconned it to try to get it to fit more, but the original work is still filled with some very good ideas and concepts to be fleshed out. Particularly the Gray Shields and the founding of whole chapters like it has at the beginning of the Dark Imperium book, where he's taking 1,000 Marines of the Unnumbered Brotherhood and just forming chapters to guard areas along the Great Rift. And he's also forming chapters for specific duties, very specific. And he's also looking to have chapters oversee planets, not just one recruiting chapter planet, but multiple planets, similar to what Ultramar is, but on a smaller scale. Again, I know a lot of people have disliked this book, but I actually found a lot of really good concepts in it. And it was from these concepts of the Unnumbered Suns, the Gray Shields, and the founding of chapters with specific purposes to guard areas along the rift that I first started to get the ideas that I was going to use in the creation of my Space Marine chapter, which led me to the next step. At the time I was deciding what my chapter should be, I had been heavily reading the Horus Heresy series, And two books in particular kind of came to mind. Praetorian of Dorne. I play an Alpha Legion army, as some of you know. But I really liked the portrayal of the Imperial Fist in this one. And it got me to thinking. And another one was the Shattered Legions, particularly the Iron Hands. I liked a lot of their short stories. I liked how they operated, how they were, more machine. The flesh is weak. At one point, I debated making a Space Marine Primaris chapter that was off of Iron Hands originally. Their whole point of that would be to do up roughly 1,000 to 1,500 points. I'm not sure on what the power level would be, and then combine it with Mechanicum forces from the Adeptus Mechanicus, mostly focusing on things like servitors, Castellan robots, breachers, and the like. All the, basically they've taken people who've screwed up in society, turned them into servitors, turned them into war machines, and work right alongside this chapter. This chapter was supposed to work right with the Mechanicum side by side, and I was thinking about having them have a backstory where they were assigned specifically to guard this particular Forge world and to further its interests. There are a lot of great stories there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, I ended up finally deciding to go a different route. Instead, I started going with a concept from one of my favorite book series, and also great HBO series, as long as you don't watch the last season, which, let's be honest, let's pretend it never existed. Game of Thrones. And the concept I went with, for those of you who have seen it, you already know what the concept is, but those who have not watched it, I went with the concept of the Night's Watch. So the concept I went with from Game of Thrones was the Night's Watch. It's a sworn brotherhood that guard the wall that protects all the civilized kingdoms from the unnatural horrors of the north and the barbarian tribes and everything else that goes bump in the night. The wall stands as their great fortification, and from the wall they start launching raids up into enemy-held territory. And like I said, they were in like a nightly brotherhood, and it just sort of fit with me as far as how I started thinking about the Great Rift. So I went and also in part back to a White Dwarf article from November of 2019, Dawn of the Era Indomitus, going over to the Indomitus Crusade, where it was talking about things like the Torchbearer fleets and also things like hub fortresses, which were set up to recreate the psychic networks, telepathic networks, and astropathic networks for travel and communication through the Imperium with the opening of the Great Rift. Now, with the Night's Watch, I just changed it to the Watch Knights, and then started thinking, well, since they were founding whole chapters to guard areas, it makes sense that they would build a sort of wall in depth alongside a section of the Great Rift held by a Space Marine chapter, the Watch Knights. So the concept was to have this group of Marines guard, say, 10, 15 planets right on the edge of the rift and another 10, 15 further back, and that would be their area. That would be their wall from which they would fortify and then begin sallying forth either into the rift or out to the areas around it in an effort to stabilize things. So the founding chapter of my chapter I decided would be Imperial Fist, being as they were known for fortifications. And let's face it, you're fortifying a wall or an area of space right alongside the Great Rift. I also picked them, the Imperial Fist, because they had a successor chapter known as the Black Templars, which was a very knightly crusading kind of order, given to attack, very zealous. And I kind of like the combination of the two, the fortified and then the zealous launching of crusades out into the Great Rift and into the surrounding areas in an effort to stabilize it. And so with that in mind, I went with Imperial Fist doctrines and the like when picking out everything, and my chapter is an Imperial Fist chapter. It tends to be a Codex chapter. I decided that very early on. They're going to be fairly regular and not compliant with Imperial edicts. I also really wanted to stress with them the fortified nature of the Imperial Fists. The planets that they've been assigned to, they are helping build fortifications, same as they did on Terra in the Horus Heresy. And they're also launching crusades. Even though this is an Imperial Fist successor chapter, I wanted to show that they were also veterans of the Indomitus Crusade, and their time with Guilliman and among the Unnumbered Sons, the Grey Shields had changed them and really kind of affected their development and how they approached combat, and even how they organized a bit as a chapter. Showing them mixed in with different chapters all in the same squad, I wanted to show that they had learned subterfuge, infiltration, and sabotage tactics from Raven Guard, that they had learned about machine and mechanics and making full use of the mechanicum and that from Iron Hands groups, that they had really studied logistics and working together with their allies, not just from the Crusade where you had different elements of either the Astra Militarum, the Adeptus Astartes, the Custodes, the Silent Sisters, and the Imperial Knights, and the Mechanicus all working together, but that they also picked it up from Guilliman, the Ultramarine need to organize, and just logistics and preparations and empire building for the most part, as well as organizing for war. I also wanted them to learn about, how to conduct lightning raids from fellow White Scars, that legionnaires who were with them, and just kind of show how that experience of the Indomitus Crusade up until they were set out to found their chapter and defend an area, how that affected them and how they developed as a chapter as a result of that. From their time in Indomitus, I wanted them well acquainted with Shadow Spear operations and feeling quite capable of launching them. Furthermore, Shadow Spear operations kind of also fit with the idea of the Night's Watch or the Watch Knights, simply because you send a few people who are good at cutting throats into the enemy area just to disrupt things. I wanted to include Shadow Spear tactics in with the regular Marines and make it so that the Marines were interchangeable. That was one thing I wanted to stress with this chapter. Even though they're Dorn and they're known to be stubborn and dogmatic, I wanted to show the Indomitus Crusade and their time with Guilliman had taught them to be flexible above all. Tactical flexibility being a major watchword of the chapter. I also wanted to portray that this was a chapter that knew just how much of a knife edge everything was at the moment, and that each member of the chapter was to make the most of his most contribution possible. In other words, everything they did was to inflict maximum damage, gain the maximum time, and basically keep things on the brink. I also wanted a chapter that was aware that 2, 3, 4 Marines alone were not going to retake a planet. However, 2, 3, 4 Marines, along with PDF that they had helped raise and that they blew open the main routes into a city for, could then rush in and retake the city. Those 5 Marines would act as a force multiplier. And I wanted the idea of force multiplication throughout the army as well. After all, 5 Marines have been compared to basically 5 greatest generals Earth has ever seen. So those 5 greatest generals that Earth has ever seen in the form of 5 Marines on a planet with a speciality for defense could teach and help design defenses that could keep a reasonably stocked PDF force that was relatively well supplied, able to withstand siege, if not indefinitely, but for a very long time. And also have them act as a force multiplier when it comes to dealing with the problems that the universe is dishing out to them. in the form of warp incursions, in the form of the psychic awakening, in the form of, alien invasions and the like, them able to intercept, defeat, or at least head off and stave off these disasters before they can really take hold and fortify what they have, go out, stabilize an area, fortify, go out, stabilize, fortify, go out and disrupt. They are, like I said, they're on the knife's edge. They know humanity's on the knife's edge. The fact that they served with Gilliman in the Indomitus Crusade means they should have a lot of experience working with combined arms in the Imperium. And that was something I wanted to bring to the table. So when building the army, I went with both shadow spear elements, regular elements, close combat elements, long-range fire elements, and of course command elements, all designed to work together and complement a list of Astra Militarum or even, say, Sisters of Silence and the like. In the fluff, they are also going to be helping found a Sisters of Silence school on one of the planets they hold. They'll have a number of Silent Sisters with them that are there to form a school just to help them keep back, because they're right on the edge of the Great Rift. So they could definitely use the psychic nulls to keep back all the horror that is spilling out of the Great Rift. And they're also dealing with the psychic awakening, so it's a good idea to have psychic nulls nearby to help curb the renegade psyker populations within the area that they're currently controlling, and also when they go out on patrol. This is something Gilliman has ordered them to do, and they have no problem doing it. It's right up there with creating a hub fortress for astropathic communications and navigation as far as they are concerned, which are other major tasks of it. So at any given time, roughly half the chapter is, in fact, engaged in fortifying and defending the main area along the Great Rift. And the other half of the chapter is out raiding, launching strikes in the surrounding areas, trying to stabilize the surrounding areas and responding to calls for help, which there are just a myriad of them. The whole galaxy has pretty much been torn apart and is in flames, and they are just trying to put out the fire, build up an area, and just advance and refortify other areas. And that is the whole point to the Watch Knights. Their symbol is, of course, a fiery watchtower, which symbolizes their job right along that Great Rift. They are along the border on the watchtowers, watching for danger, protecting the area behind them, and also launching raids and strikes into the area in an effort to stave off disaster. That does it for this video here. Next time we go over the Watch Knights, we're going to actually go over making a crusade list with them, and how to take these ideas and concepts and put them into a crusade list. We're also going to go into translating GWEs, because I realize that the crusade section as written in the main rulebook is, well, confusing is putting it mildly. I don't think it's well laid out at all. A friend of mine used to refer to it as Britishese or Brit as far as how it's laid out, but I've seen plenty of Brits who know how to lay things out, so I'm just going to go with GWEs for why it is laid out the way it is. And we're going to go over, what units I'm including in the crusade initially, and then we're going to show a few battle reports and show us upgrading, how to upgrade, how to maintain your crusade, how to upgrade characters, how to go about basically run a crusade, and hopefully that'll encourage you to try the same and enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch. If you've liked this video, just please hit like down below, and if you really like it, hit subscribe to watch more. Thank you very much.